Welcome to Talk World Radio, a half-hour discussion of politics as if the people mattered. I'm David Swanson. This week on Talk World Radio, we are talking about media and violence. Our guest, Rose A. Dyson, is a media education consultant, scholar, writer, journal editor, public speaker, and activist living in Toronto. She is the author of a wonderful book. If you're watching the video, you see me holding it up. Mind Abuse, Media Violence and Its Threat to Democracy. And we'll be doing an online book club in February about this book at worldbeyondwar.org for those who want to read the book and ask her questions. Rose Dyson, welcome to Talk World Radio.
No, thank you, David, for inviting me to this.
Thanks for being here. We have, I think, all been kind of badgered into believing that a lot of things are unresolved debates, like basic facts about climate change or cigarettes or a murder on the streets of Minneapolis. And one of those things seems like it's the impact of violence in the media. Is that right?
And that is true. The conventional wisdom out there is that the results of the research are inconclusive. And there are reasons for that. Industry has pushed back whenever studies come out, and usually funded their own approach to examining the problem. And one thing that I was taught in terms of methodology on research is that one should always ask where the money for the research is coming from, what the purpose of it is, the questions that are being asked. And if you examine the methodology carefully of the industry-sponsored research, you'll see that they're developed in order to create an element of doubt out there. As a matter of fact, there was a book written on the subject, co-authored, I believe, by Nancy Orsk and Sean Conway, called Merchants of Doubt. And the same kind of arguments that have surrounded the debate over tobacco and smoking and whether or not it causes cancer or climate change, that kind of pushback has been experienced by those of us who have been addressing violence in the media.
Well, wasn't one of the tactics to claim that even though there are societies with much less violence in the world and have been in the past, that people are just sort of possessed of this quantity of violence and it's cathartic and it releases it to be vicariously violent through the media, and so then you're less violent in the real world? Do people believe that?
Well, the cathartic effect has been with us for several hundred years, actually. It dates back to Shakespearean days and so on. But that's largely been debunked in recent years. If anything, rather than a cathartic effect, those that watch a lot of the films are less are become desensitized and more inclined toward anxiety and depression. There really is not much to endorse the cathartic theory in more recent research findings.
So what are the real facts in terms of the media increasing actual violence and crime and suffering?
Well, the facts are, I think, that there has been a steady increase in the amount of violence that's tolerated in society at large. George Gerbner, a renowned American media scholar that I think he was at the Annenberg School of Communication at the University of Pennsylvania for a quarter of a century and launched the cultural environment movement. I was among those that helped him do it. Used to say that an increasing tolerance or evidence, first of all, the depiction of violence in popular culture of one kind or another, whether it's television or video games, or which is a more extreme form of it, very financially lucrative aspect of it. But all of this creates this violence creep in society, creates to a mean world syndrome. And we've had several generations now that have been nurtured on this kind of entertainment from a very early age, and so there's an increased level of tolerance and less of an inclination to reject violence as a conflict resolution strategy. In fact, Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman, American uh, a military expert as well as a psychologist, has written a number of books on this, and calls it acquired violence immune deficiency syndrome. Again, the buildup, the accumulation of this kind of entertainment that's watched consistently. In fact, video games have been one of the most problematic aspects of this. And as the technology has developed, there's more and more added to the whole spectrum of what's out there for public consumption, especially for the young. I mean, the military use something like a first-person shooter video games to train soldiers to kill with impunity on the battlefield, while the same kind of games are marketed indiscriminately to the youngest, most vulnerable people on the planet without any regard for the harmful effects. And in David's most recent book entitled, I think it is Assassination Generation, Video Games, Killing and the Psychology of Aggression, he traces the progression of violent mass shootings in schools and malls and various places in society with the arrival on the market of video games. And in fact, his first chapter, I think, is entitled something like "It's Worse Than It Looks." I don't know if that answers your question, but there has been a gradual desensitization in what we tolerate.
And some of these video games are not just used by the US military and other militaries to train people, but they were developed in the first place, in part by the military and funding from the military. Is that right?
Well, in fact, the internet itself was invented by the American military. So the synergy or the overlap between the military industrial complex and the entertainment world has been fairly pronounced. In fact, some of us have referred to the military industrial entertainment complex as a more accurate way of describing this scenario. In Canada, for example, a British gentleman by the name of John Grierson was responsible for developing or starting up the National Film Board for the purposes of recruiting soldiers for war. And we've had beginning in the U.S. and there are certainly other places where films were being made almost at the same time. There's been an endless stream of war heroes being celebrated and so on. And in the 90s, I think, when there was a temporary cutback in military spending, a lot of the soldiers or those that were laid off, no longer required in real battle, took their skills to Hollywood. And in fact, for military recruiting, one of the places I'm led to believe that these recruiters go is the video game conferences that take place, and they see who's most competent at this. So there's that kind of overlap and synergy in how the communications technology has fueled and informed the military activity and vice versa.
We are speaking with Rose Dyson, whose book is called Mind Abuse, Media Violence and Its Threat to Democracy. And she will be doing an online book club at worldbeyondwar.org. You know, I wrote something about your book, Rose, and I got a comment from somebody. I had suggested, as various sociologists have reported, that there are societies that have been where people have been shown a clip of an ordinary Hollywood, movie with murder in it and have been horrified and traumatized because they don't have this concept of killing people in their society. And I got this comment back that said, well, that just proves that movies don't make people violent, or the movie clip would have made those people violent instead of making them horrified. It seems to me to miss the whole point that one video, even the first murder movie that our own children see, can be horrific and traumatizing. It's the thousands upon thousands, day and night of them, that's numbing, right?
The accumulative effect, or longitudinal studies as opposed to short-term studies. And no two people take the same thing away from having viewed a movie to begin with. We all have different responses and or reactions. But somebody that looks at a film for I would argue that to your viewer's point, that what has happened is that an American that's not appalled by any of this is probably desensitized, having seen so many of this. Whereas if the clip is shown to somebody who is not used to seeing this sort of thing, that individual is horrified in part because they have not been subjected to so much of this kind of viewing entertainment. But the industry has been very I think duplicitous in terms of what's going on in the cultural environment. There have been there's been a lot of pushback from people who have um, um, argued that censorship is too great a threat to what is happening in general in the entertainment world. One of the problems that started this whole trend was in a U.S. Supreme Court decision in 1952. The Supreme Court ruled that overturned an earlier one that had been made in 1915. At that time, it was determined that films were not subject to the same kind of protection from the First Amendment that because they were not political speech. They were something that was being produced and distributed for profit-driven reasons. And in 1952, this particular case was overturned, and it was decided that films could indeed be protected by the First Amendment. So that just opened the floodgates and allowed all kinds of entertainment media to be protected under the First Amendment, regardless of the nature of it. And of course, that there were various classification criteria that changed, and the war on traditional values was launched when something called the Hays Code was removed, and so on.
But if you don't
So
censor, if you don't censor all the horrific and misleadingly bloodless and successful and glorious violence, then you either have to put tougher ratings on the movies to tell people you don't want to watch this garbage, or you have to self regulate as a public. People have to resist buying tickets to these horrible things, but that doesn't seem to be working. It seems to be quite addictive, and the violent films, can go global without needing to translate pesky words and talking. So what's the answer?
Well, the film classification only works so well anyway. I mean, with videos or television before that, and of course that's all gone by the board to a large extent, where social media is the principal way in which young people in particular get their entertainment media. But there is discussion and attempts now to implement some kind of regulation. The there have to be the public has to develop better distinctions, or they have to be taught this. I suppose this is where media literacy or digital literacy needs to be implemented, perhaps more seriously in schools or other kind of programs. There have to be distinctions made between corporate freedom of enterprise and corporate freedom of expression. The media industries who do produce products of a sort for profit are among the only ones that don't have to determine that their product is safe for consumption before it is released, as opposed to having the public determine whether or not it's safe. I mean, if you buy an appliance and there's something wrong with it, it's recalled, or food has to be safe before it's released for public consumption. That's not the case with media, and that's not entirely fair.
It's not, but that's the U.S. government for you. They don't recall, they don't regulate chemicals until people start dying from them. Um, I wonder which is worse at this point, these entertainment films we've been mentioning, or so-called news reporting, or things that blur that distinction. I mean, when you have the president of the United States posting, murder films of people on boats and treating it as entertainment, but it's the entire content of the front page news stories the next day.
Yeah.
What is that, and what do you do about it?
Well, that I think is a manifestation of the fact that there have been, as you point out, blurring distinctions between what's news and what's advertising and what's entertainment, what is information and what's education. I mean, that led to buzzwords like infotainment or edutainment. We um, have to. And with there's also a problem with the elimination of a certain kind of standards. Again, going back to the 1952 Supreme Court decision that opened the floodgates to allow media to decide what is acceptable and what isn't. And as others have pointed out, that's resulted in the fox guarding the hen house. Morals and values, anything goes, or this. I remember in the 90s, there were debates at conferences being held here in Toronto at the university, and also in various parts of the US. Where prayers were being taken out of the classroom and so on. There were at least two books that were written, one by a colleague of mine, Kathleen Gow, Yes, Virginia, There is a Right and a Wrong. There's William Kirkpatrick, I believe, was an American who wrote a book called Why Johnny Can't Tell Right from Wrong. The Michael McVeigh was a film critic, a Los Angeles film critic, who wrote a book on Hollywood and its traditional war on values. Because in addition to the court case, what also broadened the stream of vitriol, if you like, going into popular culture, was an elimination of the fairness doctrine, so that in news particularly, there was no longer required to have a balanced, unbiased view on how things could be reported. So that helped to open the floodgates to the shock radio talk show hosts and ultimately television hosts as well, like Howard Stern or Rush Limbaugh. We had some of these in Canada, in Quebec in particular, but that the departure from values and what is right and what is wrong is partly led to the, I suppose, moral and ethical confusion that's so widespread now. I mean, Trump, as the leader of the world's most powerful country, it's been argued by others, not only myself, is actually a product of the media. I mean, he. Television has done a great deal to set the stage for the kind of leaders we elect, and who has the kind of appeal that will win voters. I guess this sort of um, television induced element into the political campaigns. Began with John Kennedy and Ronald Reagan, but Trump has really taken it to an extreme that is creating, I think, problems for the entire globe. So where we go with this is a dilemma, and we had the cultural environment movement that was launched in the I guess that would have been in 2006. That when George Gerbner organized people to, and myself included, to hold a convention on the subject at Webster University in St. Louis. Well, we somehow have to, I suppose, band together those of us who care about democracy and not allow the naysayers to control the agenda. It's a tall order, but pessimism is not a solution or an option for that matter. And again, American former presidential candidate and vice president Al Gore has been very vocal on this for years. The connections between the natural and cultural environment is something else that needs to be more fully understood and addressed.
Absolutely, it does. Rose Dyson, I've been sort of asking about media violence as an adult, speaking with an adult, but the real abuse your book suggests is done to children. Can you talk about what all of this violence on all of these screens can do to young minds?
Well, they children learn from a very early age, if they're subjected to a lot of violent imagery, that it is a handy approach to conflict resolution, not a good thing. Um, uh, um, Jonathan Haidt, that great American social a psychologist who teaches at one of the universities in New York City. I came out with a book, I think it was last year, The Anxious Generation. It was a #1 bestseller on the New York Times book list for a whole year. I've read it. I agree with what he has to say. Social media in particular does lead to depression and anxiety, among other things. Artificial intelligence is helping to reinforce a lot of these trends. And this has resulted in, I think, a little more serious emphasis on trying to develop some guardrails for how children are consuming this culture, or this kind of entertainment. And Australia is one country that's already banned social media use for and cell phones for children in schools, certainly. Until the age of 16, and other jurisdictions around the world are planning the same thing. And I know it's being debated here in Canada as well. I was sorry to see that Gavin Newsom in California has decided to side with the tech companies on this. So maybe that'll change.
Well, I don't know that he's a model moral leader so much as a politician in a place where a lot of money is at stake on
Yes.
this topic. But you're kind enough to be planning to do an online book club with this book that people can sign up for at worldbeyondwar.org. What do you plan? What do you expect? Do people generally ask surprising questions about this topic?
Well, they might. Anything's possible. I will try to deal with the book in 4 separate areas. Begin with a discussion on identifying the problem. Then one session, I'll talk in some detail about research and various kinds that have been conducted, or attempts to demonstrate the problem in many ways. And of course, the lack of response from government officials, as one politician here in Canada put it, I think this was in the early 90s, politicians all over the world have been paralyzed with fear of being accused of censorship. Well, that's hopefully beginning to change somewhat. And then we'll talk about some of the obstacles that have consistently shown up over the years, because this is not a new problem. It's been with us for decades. And then at the end, we'll perhaps try and strategize based on some of the suggestions I made toward the end of the book on possible solutions going forward.
Under, I think, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, that basic international treaty, you're supposed to ban war propaganda. It's supposed to be banned by international law. I consider most of what's on my television and my computer to be, in one shape or form, war propaganda. It already ought to be off of there, right?
It ought to. And one thing we haven't talked about, and I hope to focus some attention on in this discussion on the book, is advertising and the role it plays. Like the industry will say, well, we're just giving people what they want. Just shut the television, or take the social media away, or put the cell phone down if you don't want it. And yet it's designed to be addictive. They hook us, and then they tell us that they're just giving us what we want.
Exactly.
To feed our addictions.
Rose Dyson, we've got about 1 minute left. How can people follow your work, or get in touch with you, or keep up with your future writings?
Well, they can contact me personally, rose.dyson@alumni.utoronto.ca. I write frequently for Peace Magazine. As a matter of fact, I have an article in the most recent edition of Peace Magazine that is a component of a very ambitious organization called Project Save the World by Meta Spencer. She's a former American from Berkeley that has taught at U of T for years. You may know her,
sure.
David. Many of Meta Spencer, I work with her a lot, and I'm a member of her organization, and that's another way people can reach me.
Well, thank you very, very much for everything you're doing, Rose Dyson. The book is called Mind Abuse, Media Violence and Its Threat to Democracy. Rose Dyson, thanks for coming on Talk World Radio.
Thank you for having me, David.
This is Talk World Radio. I'm David Swanson. Take action at rootsaction.org. Help end war at worldbeyondwar.org. Read or listen to today's Peace Almanac entry at peacealmanac.org. All past shows can be heard at talkworldradio.org. Talk World Radio is produced in Charlottesville, Virginia, and syndicated by Pacifica Network. There is no way to peace. Peace is the way.